Carrie Doak with Pixel It Photography. Today I'm going to walk you through how I create my contour cut lines for big heads. This also applies to stickers. The only thing that's going to be different with your stickers is your template size. I go through about 6 steps when I break it down before actually submitting them to print. The print vendor has instructions on how to load the files and load the contour cuts, so I'm not going to go through that process of actually loading for print, but I'll show you what I do in Photoshop, and then we'll go through Illustrator where I set up my file, place and size the images, clean up any borders if I need to, actually create the cut lines, and then save the files for printing. Here's an example of one of my original images. I went out for a photo session at the high school. This was a fundraiser that we did outside of their normal team photos. So we set up the highlight and just had athletes from many organizations come, and I took their photos straight on so that I had a nice clean angle on their face and good lighting. Also very high resolution files because they're cropped in this tight to start with. So what I did is I removed my background, I erased up as close as I could to that neckline that I wanted. In this case, the helmet line gives you a nice clean line. And then I trimmed the image so that it was a small file or a small border around it, and I saved it as a PNG. I repeated that for all of the images from that session, and I put them all into the same folder. Then when I come over to Illustrator, I have a template that I've been using for several years. And there's a link in the descriptions where you can download that template. I'm going to go ahead and just show you that the pixel size on it is 3,456 pixels by 6,912 pixels. There is a reason that I'm doing this in pixels and not inches. I cannot explain it. I watched a video several years ago. I'm going to put a link to that video in the descriptions, and you can watch that video. You can reinvent the wheel, or you can go ahead and download the template file that I've been using. It's from a few years ago, so a previous version of Illustrator, but it seems to work just fine in the newer versions. Inside of the template file, I have 3 different sizing guides, and depending on what sort of big heads I'm doing, what shape I need them to be, what size I need to be, I use these as guidelines so that I get a consistent image size. Most commonly, I use this box here, which I've got them all locked, but this box here is my 30 by 20 placement guide. So I want to stay less than 36 inches, and I don't want to go any wider than 24 inches. I tell my clients that they're generally about 24 inches long or tall. In one direction, they're 24 inches because people's heads are shaped different sizes. We're not going to get a consistent width on them, but I try to get everybody the same height. I'm going to go ahead and lock those one more time. Actually, I'm going to take the yellow one off, and I'm going to take my small one off. I'm just going to hide those for now, and then I'll lock that top one. And then what I do from here is I start with placing my images. So I go up to File. My computer wants to spin. That's fun. And I go to File, Place. And because I put all of those images in the same folder, I can quickly grab just the first 6. Now I'm going to put 6 onto this first sheet. Whoops, I lost somebody. All right, we'll leave him. I'm going to put 6 there, and then I could come back and I could do the next 6. So I'm going to go ahead and hit place. And what I do with this sizing guide is, as each file comes up, I just plop them in. And on that one, you can see that I didn't trim. But here I'm going to get really consistent sizes by putting everybody inside of this sizing guide. Okay, she's a little bit longer than the rest so far, so I'm going to clean that one up. And then she's a little smaller because I didn't trim her, so I'm going to go ahead and just get that one sized up a little bit better. Okay. And then once I've got everybody to a good consistent size, I move them around. And one of the other things that you're going to notice on my template is I've got these 6 little dots in the corner. Those are what are called registration dots. And those registration dots are what keep the image file and the cut file in line when it actually goes to the printer. So those little dots are very important. Let's talk about those for a second because they're in my template, so I don't give them much thought anymore. I'm going to zoom in on them. You can see they're just a little dot, and if I was to look at their properties, they're 18 pixels wide by 18 pixels high. So perfect little circles there. I believe when you translate that to inches, it might be about 1/4 of an inch. I forgot exactly. So we'll need those as registration dots. I tend not to move them if I can, but sometimes I do have odd shapes that I'm working with, so I will have to shift them a little bit. You just want to make sure that they're sort of evenly spaced. So I like them in the middle and at the bottom and the top the way that they are here. I'm going to go ahead and lock these images so that I don't accidentally move them. And I'm going to jump to, whoops, I'm going to turn this one off. Okay, so my sizing guide is gone. Now, if I have somebody that I need to clean up a little bit, like this girl, I left her hair a little bit too long in Photoshop, and this one doesn't have an exact clean border. So one of the hacks that I'm going to use is my cover-up method. And I'm just going to create with my pen tool. So this is the first time we start using the pen tool. I'm going to create a white blob because I can get a much cleaner cut line, or I can get a cleaner line using the pen tool than I can the eraser tool in Photoshop. So I'm just going to click along the edge of his mask until I get a clean line here. And I'm just clicking. So the pen tool is a little finicky, and you see it's a little bit tedious to do this, but it was a lot better than working in Photoshop with my eraser tool. And I'm just going to click off of that so you can see how nicely that covered up. And if I wanted to clean it up a little bit more, I could zoom in a little bit more, bring that over a little bit tighter, make another line. And like I said, if you haven't used the pen tool, it's basically like bending a wire. And sometimes the more dots you have, the more annoying it is, the less you have, you can't quite get your lines right. So it's definitely something that you need to practice and you'll get really good at it. Let me just tidy that up a little bit. And these are a novelty items, so don't worry about getting them too perfect. Okay, but that looks pretty good. I'm just going to use a sharp point on that one so that I can get a nice tight line. So I double clicked it to give it the sharp point. There's probably a better technical term for it. You could watch some videos on the pen tool in Illustrator and learn what those are. I just like to give it a nice cleaner edge. And you can see that shifts my other dots just a little bit, but that is looking pretty good. And then what I'll do is I'll lock that layer down too so that I don't mess it up. From here, once I've cleaned up the edges on everybody that I need to clean up, and I'll probably do another one on this spot here. I'm just gonna, we don't need to cut around that, so I'm just gonna hide it because nobody wants that little, whoops, weird line there. Nobody wants that little helmet strap sticking out, so I'm just gonna get in there pretty tight so that when we do the outside cut line, we don't have to worry about that sticking out and looking weird. And then I think the other side, yeah, it cut off when I did my remove background. Sometimes when you remove background in Photoshop, those little bits get taken out depending on how your lighting is set up. So that one was gone there. So again, the pen tool, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut around each of these images. You can see I did a little bit more cleanup on these ones. I'm going to actually bring you over to my finished sheet because it would be time consuming if you actually watched me do every single one of those. You can see on this girl, I used the path around her. Let me get that one highlighted around her hair. Actually, that one has a big path around him. And then I should be pretty close to hers. Eventually I'll get to that one. So I shortened that image by just layering a path around it. And then if you zoom in close enough, that one, you can see that I messed up between the time that I saved it. So that should actually be up there until the time I did the video. So I've done the paths around, the cut lines around each of these. I've done the cleanup around each of these. So let me hide one of those backgrounds and I'm going to show you the way I do it from scratch. Okay, whoops, come back up to this guy with the helmet because the helmet ones I think are a little bit easier to do. So I'm just going to click on that path. Okay, you can see the path. You can see that it is transparent in the middle. It's a black path. It's 0.25 points, and this is very important. It is a very thin line. For the print vendor, they need the very thin lines. If you do a thicker border, it'll actually run the print lines twice and take twice as long to do everything and give you some really funky lines around them. So I've got that one selected. I'm just going to go ahead and hide it. And when I first start out with them, this actually is why I like to do them as a PNG file so that I can get behind the image with my highlight. So in order for me, I'm just going to go ahead and click. In order for me to see, what's really going on with this cut line, to make sure that I've got a nice border that's a consistent size around the image, I like to have this highlight. So you see when I first start off, it's going on top of the person's face. I'm going to actually bring this cut path down under the images. And then as I go a little bit further, you can see that it just creates a highlight all the way around it. And this is just something, that I do. Let me Control Z there. I don't have my cleanup paths locked. So there, I'm catching them, and I'm just going to lock them all so they don't mess with them. I'm just going to keep going around, and all I do is just click my mouse where I have a point that I want to bend that line. And like I said, this definitely takes practice, and I do try to avoid any sharp corners when I'm doing the big heads, just because this is a yard sign material. It's Coro, it's plastic, it's sharp, and you can actually cut yourself with these things. Okay, so you see how I just went around it. The spot where I have the cover up on the bottom of his helmet where his shirt was is still white, but I can see that, I've got a pretty good line going around him. So now I can just clean it up a little bit. Now, I never do a super tight cut line around my big heads. I leave this white border, or what will be a white border, because I just think they look a little bit cleaner, and it's definitely easier to do this work when you don't have to get precisely exactly tight to their helmet, because you would be really spending a lot of time to get close on all of these lines. And then you'd have weird gaps like in here, those would be solid white and just kind of weird. So this is the way that I prefer to do my big heads, with the white border around them. And I think I'll show you some examples at the end. Just make sure that looks pretty good there. Tighten it up. I'm spending way too much time on this one. Let's see, get a little bit tighter on that one. So the point is, I go back around it one more time just to give it a little bit of cleanup after I do the quick border. And then when I zoom back out, I like that background highlighting just so that I can clearly see where that line is. So then when I turn it back to transparent, I've got a thin blue border, and that's just because it's the highlighted border. If I click off of it, let me click somewhere else. Doesn't want me to click somewhere else because I've got everything locked. Let me change my tool. There we go. So I click off of it, and you can just barely see that line. So that's why I do the highlight. You can see that my white lines are on top of that one. It doesn't really matter. So that's another spot that I did a little cover up. It doesn't really matter. I can bring that path back to the top now that I've finished it. You can see that cut line. So I went ahead. This is obviously one that I've already submitted for print. So I've done all 6 of my athletes here. You can see how they're spaced out, how they're cleaned up, how they're sized up. And then to prep the file, we're going to need 2 different files. We're going to need a JPEG and a PNG. So this is where you need to understand some of the nuances of Illustrator. So I've got these ellipses. These are my cut line, or my registration dots. We talked about those. And sometimes I really control, where everything is. I'll put my ellipses at the bottom. I can delete these layers. These don't mean anything to me anymore. Okay. And then I've got a couple of those are locked. I need to lock my image files. And I've made a little bit of a mess because I can't tell here which are my cut lines and which are my cleanup paths. So I'm going to unlock out all of those for just a minute. And I believe that these ones are my cleanup paths. So by selecting them, I can see where they are. and I can see that the ones that I've selected are all just cleanup path. So I want to lock those down. I want them to be part of my images. And now if I go to these files, these are my borders around my people. These are my cut lines, and you can change the names on these. So if I click right in here, I can label them as cut lines, and I can label these as cleanup lines so that I know what I'm doing. It's not required, it's just something to help keep you a little bit organized. The point right now, what you need to do is lock your images, lock anything that needs to stay as printed versus what is simply just the actual contour cut lines. So your contour cut lines should not be locked. Your images, your cleanup, they need to be locked down. Your registration dots should not be locked. So what we're going to do is copy this artboard. And artboards aren't something that I had historically used in Photoshop, so they were a new concept to me. But once I got the hang of them, they're actually really convenient when I'm doing logo work. So what I'm going to do is click this artboard icon, and then I'm going to click the image. I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to hold down Option. I'm going to click and drag, and I have not let go of my Option key yet, so I'm still holding my Option key while I'm clicking and dragging. Now I can let go. Oops, I did it wrong. It's tricky to do this. So I'm going to hold my Option key, drag it over. Ugh, I keep doing it. Let go. That's what it is. Let go of your mouse, then let go of your Option key. I'm glad I did it wrong twice so that I could tell you exactly how I do it, because I usually just do it out of habit. I haven't had to say it out loud in a really long time. Okay. So let me Control Z. I'll do it one more time. I've locked all of my images. Keep my registration dots and my cut lines unlocked. Click my artboard tool. Okay. Click my mouse. I'm holding the Option key because I'm on a Mac. I believe it's the Control key on a Windows keyboard. I'm going to drag. I'm still holding my Option key. I let go of my mouse, then I let go of my Option key. And what it does is it copies that artboard for you. You can see it actually says artboard 1 copy. And everything that was unlocked is copied over to that artboard. Okay. Now I'm going to go back up, just click on this pointer tool just to get me out of the artboard tool, because that behaves a little differently, and sometimes I accidentally create new artboards when I click around when it's in that mode. And you can see that I've got a lot of extra files now. The next step that I'm going to do is the cut lines that are on sheet 1, my original images, I actually want to hide those. And the reason that I do that is because my path, my cut lines are over here on this other artboard now. And everything that's on artboard 1 is what I'm going to print. Everything that's on artboard 2 is just my cut line. So what I'm going to print, I don't want those cut lines there, because sometimes it's just a millimeter off and you'll actually see the cut lines on the final images. And where I've done that the most is on stickers. I forget to turn it off, and you can see the tiniest little black border on some of those stickers. So it's just, sometimes it's just a millimeter off. It's negligible. That's a hard word to say when you're actually doing the printing. So the steps go lockdown. What is your image? So sheet 1 is your image. Copy over everything that needs to be on your cut line file. It's just going to be these outlines. You want to make sure that they're all black. They're all 0.25 on the points, and you want to make sure that you've got the ellipses on both artboards. So this is my artboard 2 is my cut file. Artboard 1 is my image file. So I have those ellipses buttons or dots on both, registration dots on both sheets. Now I'm at the point where I can go ahead and save my files. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to export as sheet 1 is going to come out as a JPEG. And there are a few other formats that you can use. I tend to submit mine in JPEG. This is very important, and something that I only use in Illustrator is that I need to use artboards. Okay, so sheet 1, use artboards, and I'm going to tell it to use range 1. And that means my sheet 1. So this range is the sheet that you're printing or saving as the JPEG. So range 1 JPEG is my artboard. So I could call this artboard or artwork, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it artwork so that we know that the artwork is the JPEG. We're using artboards and we're using range 1. You don't necessarily need to use the suffix unless you're doing an actual range where you had like 3 artboards that you wanted to save as JPEGs, and it would auto number them 1, 2, and 3 at the end of whatever you put up here in the Save As field. So I'll go ahead and export. And these are the settings that I always use. Color mode RGB, maximum, compression method is baseline, resolution is 150. These are a novelty item that's going to be printed on Coro. If you go to high, the files are going to be too big. So this is what I've been doing for several years with resolution medium, and these come out fantastic. So I'm going to just go ahead and click OK. It's going to save that file for me. And then the next thing I'm going to do is save sheet 2 as a PNG. So for this one, we go to Save As, and we change it to Adobe PDF. And this is going to be my cut line. And again, I have to use these artboards. This one, it defaults to use the artboard, and we just have to remember to tell it that now we're using the second artboard that we created. So we're using artboard 2 as our cut line, and then go ahead and save. It's going to give me a few options. I turn off both of those. I can't remember if I normally turn those off, but I'm going to turn them off for today. You end up creating a very small file size, like 60 kilobytes. So I'm going to go ahead and save PDF. And then I'm going to pop open that folder. Whoops, I'm in the wrong place. Here we go. And I think I was in, oh, here we are. My cut line file. 67 kilobytes, that's about normally what they are. And I can see that it's just the outlines and the registration dots in my preview here. And then my artwork is my images, no cut lines, just my registration dots. And you are ready to submit to your print vendor. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to answer them here. If you're in any of the Team in Volume groups on Facebook, that's probably the faster way to find me. I don't think I know how to set up notifications on YouTube. So do your best to track me down. I'll try to get answers to those questions as I see them. Thanks. Bye.